I am your host, Nicole Will, and we're so happy you're here as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside older adults, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversation. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the Will Gather podcast. Nature is medicine. How do we harness the healing power of nature for our environments, for our older adults and family caregivers? My guest today is Dr. Michelle Olson. Dr. Michelle Olson is the founder of a charitable organization called Evergreen Minds. They aim to eradicate ageism and ableism by reconnecting community through intergenerational and dementia-inclusive experiences in nature and the expressive arts. Michelle has worked closely with older adults in various senior living settings for over 25 years. And I'm so happy that she is my guest today. She is a social gerontologist, a licensed, board-certified, nature-based creative arts therapist, a certified Montessori dementia care professional, a certified activity consultant, and a certified forest therapy guide. And I share with you her extensive expertise as she walks us through nature's healing power and how we can connect with our natural world. Today in our conversation, we also visit about Art Against Ageism, how being a family caregiver impacts our own views on aging and ageism, and Michelle's experience at ASA and the Art Against Ageism initiative. We look at what some of the misconceptions around aging and ageism that exist in our society, how we address them, the benefits of nature and forest therapy for our older adults and their caregivers, how we can better incorporate nature and outdoor space into our senior living environments and in our homes to promote health and wellness, how we can create more dementia-friendly environments and overcome the stigma associated with dementia, how we can support our family caregivers who may be experiencing exhaustion and burnout, and what roles nature can play. Michelle shares with us how successful programs and initiatives that have utilized nature to support older adults and caregivers, and how we can promote equitable access to nature, particularly for low-income or marginalized communities. And where do we start if we want to bring nature into our days? How we can work together to prioritize the health and well-being of our older adults. Does technology play a role in promoting the benefits of nature? And how we can continue to advocate for more conversation and investment in nature-based interventions. Here is my interview with Dr. Michelle Olson. Hi, Michelle. You don't know this, but I was introduced to you through LinkedIn, but unofficially, because we were connected and I could see what you were up to and your work. I just was drawn to who you were and your smile and your message. So I reached out and was like, we need to talk and I want you as a guest. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Nicole. I feel the same way. Just so you know, I
Thank you.
appreciated you and your work from our collaborations and through different people on LinkedIn. So thank you. Thanks for
Yes,
having me.
I know. And then we got to have our first conversation, which was so awesome. We should have hit record. It was just so
Yeah, we should
good.
have.
Yeah. And now we get to visit today. So, looking at your background, you started as a former activity director, and now it's brought you into gerontology and what you're doing now. Can you tell us more about you and what you're up to and the mission that you are on?
Yes, thank you. So I was an activity director, and before that, I was an art therapist. I still am an art therapist. So my training is as an art therapist, which led me to work in long-term care, which led me to become an activity director and then a corporate director of recreation. And so that definitely is a lens that I view my work, both as an
Yeah.
art therapist and a recreation director, because I see the value in these social relationships, these
Mhm.
connections, and just getting up each day and helping to provide opportunities for expression and enrichment and joy and curiosity, right? So these are things that I've loved for a long time, and I had also wanted to become a gerontologist. So I did that when I was almost 50. So that too is just part of my journey. And so I feel as an art therapist, a gerontologist, and a nature and forest therapy guide, it's like everything I love, right? It just melds everything so beautifully. And that's pretty much how I got to where I am right now with Evergreen Minds.
Pulled it together, and it fits so perfectly when I look at your work and your lens on the world, how you've been able to incorporate your background and now do really meaningful work and educate all of us, I think, from your perspective. And I'm excited to learn from you today. One of the things I wanted to ask you is I know you were recently at the On Aging
Mhm.
Association, right? Their conference that they just had in Atlanta, and I'm excited to hear you talk about your perspective because you also had this really cool initiative, Art Against Ageism. So, how was that for you? What did you experience? What did you learn?
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, so I was recently at ASA's On Aging conference in Atlanta, and we collaborate, Evergreen Minds collaborates with Art Against Ageism, which is a fabulous organization which resonates so much with my heart. And it was founded by Meg Laporte and Jordan Evans. And so, they have these monthly gatherings, and I joined. And, it's when you connect with people, your tribe, it, right? So I was immediately like, what can we do? We had done a conference together in the summer at the Pioneer Network. We did ASA. We have two others that we're going to be doing this year as well. And so a board member of ours at Evergreen Minds, Jody Berman, Meg, Jody, and I worked to bring different art installations to this conference to really get the message out about ageism that is really residing in all of us. And so it was a little uncomfortable, to tell you the truth. So we had a prompt that we asked people on all social medias and in our different workplaces and so forth. The question was, what's your age and what have you learned? And so we asked people from 14 to 97 was our oldest. And it was wonderful. And what we all learned throughout our whole lives, right? Throughout the whole life course. And so we put this on a projection on a large screen. These responses were put on a wall, and people could sit and reflect. We constructed I think it was 10 foot. We had a 10-foot tree made of wire, and all of these colorful responses were put on fabric, recycled fabric, which were then hung, suspended from this tree. So it was really a metaphor, right? This idea of a tree and how we're all connected through the roots, and we're continually works in progress and growing and reflecting. There was a mirror component to it as well, so people could face who they are and feel good about where you are in this moment, which isn't always easy to do, right, in our
No.
society.
Yeah. Did you find were people hesitant to list what their age was or excited about it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
In fact, we had like half as many responses as we had for a previous prompt. But
Okay.
what Meg did was create a private link, right? So for
Yeah.
people, because it's ageism in the workplace is a real thing. So if you put
Mm.
on LinkedIn your age, there's a fear attached to that,
Mm-hmm.
that there's going to be
Mm-hmm.
some repercussions,
Yeah.
and which is sad in itself, right? It's the
Right.
reality of
Right.
ageism,
Yeah.
and yeah, so that people could share it openly or privately,
Okay.
and
So
yeah.
good.
So, and I went into senior living communities and asked them their perceptions, and they were very free to share, which I loved.
Yeah. What did you find? What did people speak to about what they've learned? Was it more generalized or more specific?
It was both. Some people
Mm-hmm.
really shared personal things that they've accomplished in their life or that they've come to learn about
Mm-hmm.
themselves, about being forgiving or having limitations, the ability to say no or take rests, or, it was just
Yeah.
so diverse. But it was beautiful. And one of the things I'll just share real quick,
Mm-hmm.
which was kind of like a little accident at the end. So at the very end of this conference, and there's, I don't know, 150 or more pieces of fabric on the floor. I had to take this beautiful construction down at the end, which made me sad, right? Because I loved it. I bonded with it, right?
Yeah.
But I had to take the sculpture down to enfold, kind of compress it, and the hotels would recycle it. But the fabric was in a pile on the ground. These two ladies came up and they were like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And they hadn't seen it before. And I was like, "Oh, this was a sculpture," I explained. She bent down and she picked one up and she read it. And it so aligned with her that she was kind of taken back. She was like, "Wow, this was meant for me today." And I was like, "Oh
Wow.
my gosh." To the other lady, I said, "Do me a favor, close close your eyes and grab a fabric from the ground and see how that feels, how it lands with you today.
Yeah.
And she did, and she was like, this is perfect. Can I take it home? And I was
Oh,
like, absolutely. So
wow.
it emphasized like this
Yeah,
project ripples, right? It keeps going
it
when we
does.
learn from each other and
Yes.
support one another.
And the conversation in the community, not only at the conference, but I know there's been this ripple effect online as well, where we can witness and
Oh,
see and the momentum of having the conversation around it.
thank you. Thanks.
Do you find specifically talking to family caregivers how our own views of aging and ageism show up when we're in that role? What do you witness? Or for people in general, I think, what we're dealing with, how we're viewing aging and ageism from your
Mhm.
perspective?
Yeah. Well, I think as a human and and a caregiver,
Hmm.
people's our lived experiences might lead us to believe that our experience is what growing older is, right? So, like a common misconception is that, for example, depression and dementia are a normal part of aging. And I hear this in
Right.
my students, I hear this in older people that I care for and their care partners. But we know that they're not uncommon, but they're not a normal part of aging, right? So,
Hmm.
kind of our mindset about getting older has a lot to do with how we age. And
Yeah.
we've seen that in research, right? A lot of talk about Becca Levy's work and, how our own internal perceptions about getting older and old people, really can impact our own physical health,
Yeah.
our cognitive health, our emotional health, and our mortality, which is
Hmm.
crazy.
I also look at it when you were just sharing about the experience with Art Against Ageism and having the transparency with age and
Hmm.
seeing what is possible or the framework or the lens that people have at different ages. I think we don't always know, and I know for me we're all aging every day and interact
Hmm.
with different people, you start to see also what's possible, what can be accomplished at various ages. And I think having the transparency or people in our life at some point that can share a little bit more vulnerably about it is helpful because then it
Hmm.
shapes how we view getting older.
Right, right. I agree. I
Hmm.
agree.
Are there common misconceptions that you think people have? And that's a big question, right? That
Hmm.
can be a big
Yeah,
question
yeah.
that exist in society. And any tips on how we address that or overcome some of those?
I think the biggest common misconception, my opinion, about aging is
Hmm.
that we think it's something that happens to older people, right? Like we're
Yeah.
not aging,
Right.
they are.
Yeah.
It's us and them. So, in fact, we know we're all aging, and
Hmm.
aging, as you said, I mean, that's living. That is the equivalent. So, this line of thinking can lead to ageism. And because older people are seen as those people who are aging or declining, right? When in fact it's a natural part of life.
It is. We
I think
are.
the
I
biggest
always try to frame that too, even for myself. Like I'm
yeah.
aging every day. Yeah, we
Mhm.
are.
Yeah, and just being aware of that, like just learning to be comfortable with that. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's how we address it, right? Starting
Mm-hmm.
inward, hence the
Mm-hmm.
mirror in the sculpture. It's like noticing how we feel about our own aging and learning to become comfortable with that
Mm-hmm.
and start there.
Having people we can talk to about it too.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
know we're kind of covering a couple different topics, but I had to get your experience with the art against ageism and the on aging, and
Thank
also
you.
your lens with being a nature based art therapist, a gerontologist, a forest therapy guide, and your work with older adults. I want to dive into that also.
Mhm.
And with oh my gosh, there's so many benefits. And can you share with us when we incorporate nature and forest therapy for seniors, their caregivers, what that does for our physical health, our mental health, our emotional well being, all of those? I know that you've got so much to share with us in that regard.
Yeah, I do. I love it. And there is a lot of empirical evidence about the benefits of being outdoors on our health. And that includes
Mhm.
our physiological health, our mental health, cognitive health. And I mean, I can tell you the biggies that I
Yeah.
think people are always interested in. Being in nature activates our parasympathetic nervous system. Like I'm generally a very anxious person. So
Mm.
when I go out, it just takes me right down,
Yeah.
lowers heart rate, reduces blood pressure, and allows us to rest and digest, right? And
Mhm.
so our cortisol and stress is lowered. Being in nature, it lowers depression and anxiety. It helps us sleep better. And I mean, caregivers, all people need these things, right?
Yes.
It boosts our immune system, which is so, so important, lowers blood sugar, decreases inflammation. There's research findings that show that time in green space can increase physical activity, right? And just help us to have a lower body weight, just be healthier. So yeah, there's so many benefits. I mean, theories about called attention restoration theory. That is, I think this is fascinating
Oh,
because
yeah.
it
Do
posits
you
that
mind
that
telling us more about that? I'm
but
curious. Yeah.
it is really interesting. So
Hmm.
attention restoration theory posits that, the mental exhaustion that so many of us feel in our
Hmm.
busy tech-filled lives, it causes to lack ability to direct our attention. And so according to this theory, spending time in the natural world helps us to really recover mentally and restore. That's the most important thing. Recover and
Yeah.
restore,
Yes.
our ability to focus and direct our attention. So and I, for one, really appreciate that.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. And that was one of my future questions is talking about, as caregivers and families, we can experience that exhaustion and burnout. And from what you were sharing, some of those facts that really can help alleviate some of that as we're going into needing some reprieve and respite from all of that.
right, totally.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Do you find so we also have loved ones that live in senior living communities and our caregiving continues, and we also have senior living professionals that listen to the podcast, which is wonderful. How can we better incorporate nature and outdoor space into those senior living environments, right? Promoting that health and wellness. And then side question as I'm thinking in the moment and also into our homes, right? If we've got loved ones living with us or helping mom or dad increase their quality of life in their home.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that, Nicole.
Yeah.
But so this is going to sound really flippant, and I don't mean it to. But like when I think about incorporating nature and outdoor spaces into senior living, like that's really the basis of why I started the not for profit. It's I would say live in them, right? Like if we were to actually live in these communities, even for a
Yes.
short amount of time, we might have a better understanding of what it means to be really person directed, or kind of viewing these environments through a nature lens. I mean, a lot of places are doing a really good job, right? Like the greenhouse project model of homes are wonderful, but I would say generally the models are outdated, and so
Yeah.
I also say inhumane. I mean, if I'm going to speak honestly, I feel if any one of us were to sit inside of a community where we didn't have the actual choice and
Hmm.
access every day to get outside or wheel outside, how would we feel
Yeah.
emotionally, physically, and all the rest? So, one way to address that, and obviously people can't just renovate these homes, but
Hmm.
there's things that they can do, and these are things people can do in their homes. So are the doors and windows accessible? So at home, it might be a little different, right? They may not have the ability to have like a safe kind of a backyard, but maybe
Right.
they can. So are the doors and windows accessible? How are the lights? Do they match the circadian rhythm of a human, right? Or are they
Mm.
just constantly glaring at this high frequency? It's like it's overwhelming. The sounds, I'm thinking about sounds when I go into senior livings, sounds and the smells. Are there natural elements that can be brought in? And yes, plants. And I'm a big fan of real plants, color, are there kind of soft, natural colors that can help
Mm.
people? Just basically thinking about sensory
Right.
or biophilic design. I don't know if you've heard of biophilic design, but really tapping into the senses of us as human beings and water features. Can we hear birds? Can we, you
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
have
Incorporate that.
aquariums? Are there fish tanks in there? And gardening, that's good for everybody. Flowers, herbs, veggies,
Yeah, we
so
can
many
pick up
things we
on the
can do.
smell and oh my gosh, it just incorporates all of those senses. And when you talk about the light, I did not necessarily equate that to incorporating nature, but you're right in
Mhm.
that having artificial light and not honoring the circadian rhythm of how we live, or should, I should
Hmm.
say should.
Right.
It's so true that fluorescent light is so hard for me on my eyes, and the blue light, it's like I almost avoid it if I can.
Right.
And it
Right.
affects our sleep. And oh my goodness,
Absolutely.
so many things. I'm really glad that you brought that up. And even the sounds, right? The sounds of nature, water, birds, things that we
Hmm.
probably take for granted when we are walking outside, but we know that we hear and we can see. And when you remove that, just the detriment that that can do for our mental health, and we might not even realize that that's what's missing, but it is. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And it's and just the air quality, right? Indoors is much more polluted. And
Mm,
I mean, there's just things we can do. I just think yesterday I went to the store and I got myself a big what's the flower called that smells really strong? Not for oh goodness. Oh, it
um,
smells so sweet. Oh goodness, I'm drawing a blank. Oh, I'm
what
drawing
does
a
it look
complete blank.
like? What we'll do. What does the flower look like? Let me see if I can.
Yeah, let's describe. Well, it comes in white, pink, and purple, and I picked purple.
Oh,
Not hydrangea. It starts with an H. I'm sure some of the listeners are going to go
yeah.
"What?"
They'll be like,
Here,
I
and
know,
it's
I
like
know.
my favorite
Uh,
spring flower, and I don't know why I'm drawing a blank.
yeah.
But anywho, I love it. I brought it in just for
Mm,
the sole purpose of my senses, right? Like giving me
mm-hmm.
something to take in and feel good and relax and calm.
Yeah,
Every night I light a candle because I can't take the lights like you were talking about. So,
right.
what can we do, to kind of relax our environment
Yeah.
and connect with the natural world? Hmm.
And specifically, how do you incorporate that or direct or educate for communities that are more dementia friendly environments? And even in home, when we've got that lens and like overcoming some of those stigmas around dementia and how we can interact with nature.
Yeah, so I've long said that exposure in and with nature, it's an environmental justice issue to me,
Mm,
right? So if we think about marginalized communities who lack access to the safe air and water,
yeah.
and communities, I can't even help but question how then older people, particularly people living with dementia, are treated as if they no longer require this connection with the natural world. It doesn't even make sense if we step back and look at that.
Yeah.
And it's just very often just accepted like, well, that's just how it is, right? We lock people up and we close the door for their safety, and this is what we do. But these inequities they're not okay for me or
Mm,
for you or for any
hmm.
human being.
Yeah. Are you finding communities are receptive to implementing some of the practices to incorporate more nature-based practices? Or what are some of the hurdles that you're finding that you've got to overcome
Mhm.
with those conversations?
Yeah, there is research on that too, and I definitely am finding people are places are open to this. I think they're very interested in this work that we're doing.
Hmm.
One, for instance, is working with us to implement a sensory garden, which is wonderful,
Mm,
right? So tapping into the senses we just talked about,
yeah.
and a lot of places are doing these wonderful things like having a vegetable garden. But how can we push a little bit further, right? How can we make even the indoor spaces feel more biophilic, kind of a part of nature?
Hmm.
So the barriers, just to answer your question about that, I
Yeah.
mean, and I can speak from the activity director in me. It's hard, right? There's a lack of staff. So who's going to take these people out if these folks have to stay in?
Right.
And so what happens is because of that lack of people to help, the people that don't have a voice, who are not able to verbalize, they're kind of left, or if they can go out, it's very rare, and that's not okay, right? This should be a daily access. So can we
Hmm.
work with organizations to help bring in volunteers? So I don't know if you know Paul Felkowski from Volunteer. He has a
That name sounds
fine.
so familiar. Yes.
Yeah, I'll connect you on LinkedIn, but
I love
this is
that.
the work he's doing, is to bring volunteers in to
Mm,
meet these needs. So rather than saying, sorry, we don't have enough staff to take you out, that's not an excuse, right? These
right.
are human beings. And so we've got to come up with innovative ways to get people in to help out. Is it caregivers that have an hour an afternoon, or
Mm,
volunteers? What can we do? And then the weather, right? That's another thing that I see all the time, almost every week. I live in New York, so it's like hot one day, freezing the next.
yep.
But
Cold, snowy
um,
one day. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm on the team of like, you know what? I want to feel it all, or at least give me
Mm,
the choice to feel it all.
right.
Don't tell me it's too hot or too cold because you're afraid that I'm going to get frostbite or
Mm,
sunburn. That's right. Figure it out.
yeah.
Figure out a way where we can offer that choice. And so even older people themselves, I think, have become adjusted to this indoor climate. So when they do feel the fresh air, it's like, oh, it's cold, right? It doesn't feel natural anymore. And that needs to change. Seasons are wonderful, right? I mean, we're meant to be experiencing them
Hmm.
together. So
Yeah, I know. I was just talking. So my son who's 13, and we've had the third snowiest winter ever in Minnesota. It's been
yes.
a long winter. But I was
Um,
asking him, we were talking about the weather. We're going to Florida soon, and I said, "Oh my gosh, are you so excited? Leave the snow. This is getting harder." And he looked at me and he's like, "Mom, I love feeling all the seasons. I like the cold because then
oh,
when I'm too cold, then it starts to get warmer. And then I like the rain. And then I like experiencing the sunshine in the summer." And he walked through this, and I'm like, "Yeah, buddy." I
love
love his
it.
perspective. Yeah, that he was just embracing the changes and the seasons and the weather. And to your
Yeah.
point, I love that you brought up the solutions focus that, okay, we can talk about maybe what some of the hurdles are, but how do we provide solutions to that? And having
Mhm.
access to volunteers or looking at what are the ways we can manage some of those frustrations in a positive way so that it fuels that creativity, that solutions
Mhm.
focus. Thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that up. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a human right,
Mm-hmm.
having access to the natural world is our right, and we have to figure it out. It's not okay to just say it's too hard, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's hard. No, I'm not going to deny that it's hard, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
impossible. That's
Mm-hmm.
the difference.
Exactly. Who have you worked with? I think you brought up one community, but what are some specific examples of those successful programs or initiatives or things that you've helped people put in place? I think we can get, I don't know, like the juices flowing and ideas started when we hear maybe what some people are up to.
Yeah, well, actually, one of the things that we're working on, the board and I of Evergreen Minds, we're working on like an educational program, kind of a training program that places can implement. So to
Love
really
it.
kind of implement our philosophy, right? This kind of reciprocal relationship with the natural world and seeing nature as a human right versus just like we got to go outside and strip it for all the resources it's worth. It's like
Mm,
really building on that relationship with the natural world, and so that's one thing we're doing. But we have several different senior living communities that we go into, assisted living and long term. And so
mm,
we do different things. They're all nature based. They might be part of the garden. So we have a community garden at Vassar College. And so the residents that are in these communities that aren't able to come out to the garden, although one community is coming to the garden this summer, we bring the garden to them. So they help us, they establish it, they plant the seeds for us. We
wow.
create art together that they hang in their home and we hang in the garden. So it's this relationship, and
Mhm.
then when the produce is harvested, we bring it back to them, and then they can cook with it, they can do programming with it. And again, talking about rippling, right, and the roots of the tree, it just goes on and on. So it's just really beautiful work, and not to mention it gives the students an opportunity to learn and reframe what they
Mm.
think about older people, about the aging process, about dementia. It's really wonderful, and for the folks living in these communities, it's wonderful as well because they get to share life experiences and a lot of humor. We have a lot of joy in these
Mhm. I'm
experiences
sure.
together. So
And when we do activities together, we had conversation around so many different things like, did you garden when you were growing up, or what's your favorite vegetable, or what did you like to
mhm.
do when you got your hands in the dirt, or whatever it was. I think it's such a great place and format for having that meaningful conversation and then forging that relationship, right? When you've got that common interest,
Right,
it just can
that's right.
springboard from that.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you.
You touched on this a little bit in a previous question, but I would love to hear more of your thoughts on how do we promote equitable access to nature, outdoor spaces, particularly, lower income or marginalized communities. How can you share with us about
Mhm.
that?
Yeah, thank you. That is such a thoughtful question, Nicole. And while I may not be my specific expertise, I definitely have opinions and thoughts about it. I come from a very diverse family. And, we just thinking about nature, I mean, we know nature and biodiversity, as I just said, it's a human right, and it
Mhm.
should be free. It should be accessible for everyone. But we also know that for some people, particularly Black people, people of color, they experience the racial and environmental injustices, just like we were talking about with people with dementia.
Yeah.
And really the disparities like that, the higher air pollution, they have fewer trees in these communities, wetlands, marshes, forests, parks, right? The communities of color here, this is something that I learned recently.
Mm.
Communities of color are 3 times more likely than white communities to live in nature deprived areas,
Wow.
right? People with low income compared to non-white people are also more
Mhm.
likely to experience nature deprivation. And that was from the census data from
Mm.
2017 and the Conservation and Science Partners in 2020. So, yeah, I think it's just important to recognize that not all people, feel safe even going outside. And this happens. I've seen this with people with dementia. Not everybody feels safe being outdoors for different reasons. A big one is racism. Right, we've
Mhm.
we've seen this a couple years ago. You remember that story about the white woman who made false claims about this African American man, Christian Cooper, who was just
Mhm.
bird watching in Central Park. Ahmaud Arbery, who was
Mm.
murdered while jogging
Yeah.
in Georgia. So these are things that happen, right?
Yeah.
Indigenous, Hispanic, Latino, Asian communities, people that are economically marginalized,
Mhm.
members of the LGBTQ community, people who are
Yeah.
disabled, often unsafe and lack equal access to natural environments.
Right.
So Native American communities are especially impacted, right, by
Mhm.
what's happening in their communities with gas and oil development. Yeah, so that with little, there's like no consultation. That's the issue too. There's little to no consultation with tribes. It impacts their sacred
Mhm.
lands, their health.
Mhm.
It just goes on and on, right? There's so much to that question that I
Yeah.
can really get passionate about.
Right. Right. It's
Yeah.
so important that we keep bringing awareness to it and having the
Mhm.
conversation around it. Yeah.
That I have to reflect on all the time, right? In my own work, when we talk about bringing voices to the table, even conservation movements are predominantly led by white people, and so we need representation of diverse people, people of color, and in these foundations, organizations, and we can apply that to all of our systems and uh, elder care and health care and yeah, and just really help to eradicate these inequities. They're real.
They are. Thank you for speaking to it so eloquently. Any advice on how we can elevate those voices in this space?
I mean, I think first, governments, right, need to consult with the very people that live there. Just like we
Hmm.
talk about asking the people who live in senior living, asking them what they want, ask people who live in these areas, include them in the decision making, in regards to land and energy development, providing resources in other languages other than English, you know, what
That's a
else?
really good piece of advice. Yeah.
Increasing representation of people of color and people in LGBTQ community in these governmental agencies,
Hmm.
organizations, environmental agencies, right? So I think there's things to do. Where I live here in New York, Mariah Carey has a program called the Fresh Air Fund, and we have Evergreen Minds has partnered with a program called No Child Left Inside, which is through the
Mm.
Cornell Cooperative Extension. So these programs are wonderful, right? So they're connecting inner city
Yeah.
kids with these nature experiences. So they're learning about nature and
Mm.
science and land stewardship and influencing younger kids. So that's how we make change,
Yeah,
right?
it is. It is. Thank you. And we can include some of those resources on the website
Sure.
too. We can
Mhm.
let people know how to connect with that. So, what advice would you give people that are like, oh my gosh, I haven't really incorporated nature in my life? Where's
Mm.
a good place to start? Is there like, dip your toe in? Obviously,
Yeah.
for those of us that can get outside and do, but that's not always an easy possible option.
So acknowledging that, right? Say it's not
Mhm.
easy,
Mhm.
taking a deep breath, and then prioritize it, right? Like just like we have compassion, people as caregivers have compassion for the ones that they're caring for. practicing self-compassion,
Mm.
flipping it backwards to yourself. That's really important. So when we talk about dipping your toe and taking time with the natural to connect with the natural world, I mean, it's really vital for our own mental and physical health, and research shows that when we care for ourselves, we make better carers for others. So prioritize
Yeah,
yourself.
I love that, giving us permission to being able to do that for ourselves.
Mhm.
That's huge.
Mhm.
Yeah. Are
Yeah.
you okay? So we wouldn't maybe normally think of putting tech and nature together. Is there any role that it does play in promoting the benefits of nature?
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that?
That is something too that I have kind of looked into, and people have asked me about it because when the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, I started this foundation, this organization during the pandemic, right? So that was like really crummy timing.
Mm,
So
yeah.
we're talking about getting outdoors in nature, but meanwhile, nobody could get near each other.
Right.
So we had to do things online, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to lie, it was not ideal,
Mm,
but we did what we could do. We can connect and have these connections prompted through the online format. But I mean, yeah, especially coming out of the pandemic. I mean, I know there's VR applications so people can go to green and blue spaces with the headset on.
mm.
Certainly, it's not the answer. Maybe it works in partnership with actually getting some fresh air. There's a lot of work done through drone technology, about reforestation and farming and so forth. But from the lens of what I do and from a caregiver perspective, I mean, there's wonderful nature apps. I have a few on my phone. Maybe you do too, I know you love nature.
Mhm.
Um, but like iNaturalist, the Merlin app, if you're a bird nerd like me, and Plant ID. I mean, these are wonderful ways
So
that people
cool.
can connect with the
Mm-hmm.
natural world and with each other. So some of them have platforms where you can connect with other nature nerds, and you can share your findings with researchers. I mean, so there are some good initiatives, like tech initiatives, but honestly, I feel so passionately about real nature,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like being with the natural world because we're a part of it all.
Yeah,
So
all the time. Yeah, that interactive piece, if it can make it come to life in new ways, right? Or
yeah.
if we learn something while we're being outside. And okay,
Mhm.
so we want to continue this movement and awareness around it. How do we continue to advocate for more research, investment in nature-based interventions for seniors and caregivers, support the work that you are doing? How can we continue to do that?
Such good questions, Nicole. Well, I really am hopeful that we've learned something, a thing or two,
Mm-hmm.
from this COVID pandemic, because perhaps more of us now, we value this connection with the natural world, maybe more so than we did before, and even understand the health and wellness value of being outdoors. And
Right.
and conversely, how being stuck inside can make us sick, make us ill. So, if we as we said before, there's so much literature on nature-based interventions and experiences and outcomes of caregivers and adults, but it's not the thing that I'm finding too.
Mm.
Like research isn't always accessible or made public, right?
Yeah.
So
Or if you
who
don't know
when they're
where to
published,
find it either. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are always shocked when you tell them like it's not just get outside, it feels good for you, but there's research behind it. People are always impressed with that. And how
Mm-hmm.
can the medical field, incorporate this knowledge as well as I was thinking about schools and governments. How about workplaces, right? Like what if someone's employer said, step away. We are asking for all employees to step away from their desk. I'm calling it the step away from your desk initiative. That's my
Mm. I like it.
step away from your
Yeah.
desk and go outside and tap into just even one single sense a day, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
what are you noticing about your sense of smell right now? And it just comes down to who's profiting, right? Like who's profiting from making us sick, and start there.
Yeah, so fascinating. Thank you. And thank you for your work and your mission. Where can we learn more? And also tell us what you are up to. So, the work that you're doing now, how you support senior living communities, older adults, the community, and then where we can find how to work with you and connect with you.
Thank you so much. So I do a few things. So connect with me on LinkedIn, and you can find us on evergreenminds.org. That's the work that I'm doing. We're hoping to put some research together to really show how bridging these gaps between communities and folks living in senior living, how and universities, like how is this beneficial for a community as a whole,
Right.
is one thing we're working on, as well as that educational component I told you about. We consult. So I've had governmental agencies reach out and say, help us. We want to connect older adults to the outside more, and be more nature and dementia inclusive, for example. So I'm happy to consult as well.
And you
I think I
teach?
answered.
Are you teaching as well? Did I?
Yes, yep. So I teach for Montana State University. I teach mental health and social issues and aging. So there's a huge slant on ageism, right? I teach a lot about ageism and awareness and how to overcome it. And that's a beautiful thing to do with students as well.
Oh, thank you. We need people like you in this world, and I'm so happy that now we are connected, and I know we'll keep in touch. You're sharing about nature's healing power, what we can do, changing our thought process around ageism and aging. It's so valued. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's just a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.